Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Shannon Madill. Shannon Madill was born in 1989 in Alberta, Canada. She spent years honing her acting skills. Her journey was challenging, but she was ready to start a new chapter in her life. On November 26, 2014, Shannon auditioned and was selected. But before she could celebrate her achievement, she disappeared without a trace. After a day passed without Shannon returning home, her family's worries grew as no one could reach her. Shannon's family was confused. Not knowing what could have happened, they called her cell phone, sent messages on all social media platforms, and left emails. But Shannon did not respond. Her behavior was unusual and completely out of character. Shannon's family contacted the police, but they stressed that Shannon was an adult who had the right to come and go without informing anyone. However, Shannon's family insisted that this behavior was out of character for her and that a search had to be launched. Fearing that something terrible might have happened, Shannon was the youngest of 4 children. From a young age, she loved being the center of attention and was very creative. She loved to sing and began performing in small shows in kindergarten. Showcasing her acting talent during her school years, ultimately did not complete her studies. Choosing instead to focus on her acting skills, Shannon spent her days attending auditions and interviews, but she was constantly rejected. However, during this time, she found an opportunity in comedy and began performing stand-up, which helped her become famous in 2010. When Shannon turned 21, she attended a party with friends to relax there. She met Joshua Burgess. He was quite different from Shannon, but they quickly connected, and these differences eventually helped balance each other out. The couple enjoyed spending time together, watching TV and playing video games. They shared many interests, which strengthened their relationship. After 4 years of dating, the couple decided to get married. In May 2014, Shannon began planning her wedding. With Joshua's active support, their wedding, attended by only their closest family members, was a joyous event. However, the couple did not seem completely happy. Over the next month, Shannon focused on her acting career, attending more auditions, some of which took place in Edmonton, a city 3 hours north of Calgary, where she lived with her husband. This meant she spent a lot of time traveling between the two places. Shannon has appeared in numerous television shows, voiced audiobooks, and even acted in plays. She has often expressed her belief that great success awaits her in Edmonton. On November 26, 2014, 25-year-old Shannon and her brother Brett had planned to meet at the Calgary Theatre. Prior to their meeting, Shannon had auditioned for a show and she was accepted. Marking a major milestone in her journey to pursue her dreams, Brett was waiting for Shannon at the theater, and he understood how important the event was to her. As the minutes ticked by, his anxiety grew. He couldn't reach her. Shannon ignored his messages. Eventually, he had no choice but to leave. He tried calling her the next morning, but she still didn't answer. Brett contacted their parents, but they were also confused about the situation. His mother suggested that Shannon's work schedule might have changed. She mentioned that sometimes, when Shannon worked the night shift, she would sleep during the day. However, this explanation didn't seem plausible. Shannon usually paid attention to her phone calls because it was important for her to stay in touch and not miss anything significant. To reassure herself, their mother thought that when Shannon woke up in the evening, she would realize she had missed the calls and would eventually call back. A voicemail message was left for Shannon, and her family assured her that they were not angry with her. They just wanted her to let them know she was safe. Unfortunately, she did not respond. Worried that something was wrong, her relatives, including her husband Joshua, went to the police for help. They reported her missing and speculated that she might have been in an accident while traveling to or from Edmonton. Initially, the police were slow to act on their request, but after some persuasion, they began to get involved. Eventually, the police launched a search operation. Hospitals were checked, but no accidents were reported that day. The following days were a blur. Family members anxiously awaited any news. During this time, Shannon did not shop, did not use any credit cards, and there were no activity records on her car. As if she had disappeared, she also stopped using her social media accounts, where she often shared updates about her acting career. Unexpectedly, a few days later, Joshua reported to the police that he had found Shannon's cell phone in her pants pocket at home. He also discovered her car, but the police did not find anything suspicious. Nearly 2 weeks passed without any news until the police found some unusual photos. 2 photos of a girl with her hair covering her face were found attached to a tree in a Calgary park, although the identity could not be confirmed. The girl bore a strong resemblance to Shannon, especially due to her bright red hair. It appeared that a potential kidnapper was taunting the police. Search efforts were organized in Big Sugar Creek, one of Canada's largest parks. Several teams were formed, including volunteers and Shannon's family members, for 2 days. Police scoured a large area, assisted by specially trained dogs and a rescue helicopter that surveyed the park from the air. Unfortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful. It was later discovered that the images that prompted the search were part of an art project created by local university students. Realizing that their photos had been mistakenly taken as evidence in connection with the case, the students contacted the police to clarify the situation. During this time, her family anxiously awaited news, but there were no clues regarding Shannon's whereabouts. It was unclear whether she would ever be found alive. The idea of a kidnapping seemed unlikely, as no ransom was demanded. Nor had the family been contacted. Joshua revealed a previously unknown fact to the police. He explained that his wife had been struggling with her acting career for years. One evening, she called him and confessed that she had considered jumping off a bridge during a particularly difficult time. She had just suffered another disappointment after auditioning for a role in a television series she had hoped to land. Fortunately, she was able to overcome the emotional pain, but she later suffered a nervous breakdown. The police were concerned that such a traumatic experience might have led her to consider end life. Police and divers searched rivers in the area, hoping to find any sign of her. Unfortunately, despite exhaustive searches along the riverbank for miles, they found no clues, and the investigation hit a dead end. By May 2015, nearly 6 months after Shannon disappeared, the police still had no clue as to her whereabouts. During this time, an experienced police officer named Christine took over the investigation, having worked in the homicide division for many years. She was known for her determination and attention to detail. Her previous efforts had led to the arrest of many dangerous criminals, and she was committed to solving this case. Christine decided to investigate those close to Shannon. She wanted to learn more about her husband, Joshua. From the beginning, he seemed like a kind and positive person. He cooperated fully with the police, allowing them to search his home twice and readily answering their questions. He also supported Shannon's family when they went to the police station to report her disappearance. Even after she went missing, the family kept in touch with Joshua, comforting each other and holding out hope. When asked about the possibility that Joshua was involved in Shannon's disappearance, all of her relatives responded that he could never hurt his wife. However, during discussions with Shannon's family about her husband, Joshua, the police made a surprising discovery. The couple had been married for over 7 months at the time of the tragic events, but it was only now, 6 months after Shannon's disappearance, that it was revealed that they had an open marriage. This meant that they were in an unconventional relationship where both Joshua and Shannon could have other partners. Joshua claimed that he proposed this arrangement and that Shannon agreed. Although she did not seem particularly interested in it, Shannon's family was also aware of the arrangement. This arrangement allowed Joshua and Shannon to explore their private lives more freely, especially when Joshua was dating other women. According to Joshua, they had no disputes about their open marriage. Surprisingly, Shannon knew about all of her husband's affairs and had even met some of his girlfriends. Officer Christine discovered that Joshua had had about 7 affairs during their marriage. It was important to interview all of his girlfriends. The police were then able to locate and question them without any difficulty, according to the investigation. Joshua's last girlfriend shared some intriguing details. She continued to see him even after Shannon went missing. This girlfriend revealed information that the police had never heard before. They discovered that just before Shannon went missing, there had been a serious conflict between her and Joshua concerning the openness of their relationship. When Shannon decided to end their open marriage, Joshua's girlfriend stated that to avoid further conflict, he agreed with Shannon's decision. However, a week later, Shannon discovered that Joshua was still in contact with his girlfriend. Despite his promise to end the relationship, she found out because he had locked his phone, which was unusual, as they had previously been free to check each other's devices. When Joshua gave her the password, Shannon discovered that instead of breaking up with his mistress, he had decided to marry her, making Shannon the second person in his life. Joshua claims he is planning to file for divorce soon. Shannon felt deeply betrayed after throwing away Joshua's phone. She carefully considered her situation and made some important decisions, including moving from Calgary to Edmonton. She was in the process of implementing this plan at the time of her disappearance. During this period, she continued to live with Joshua, but they arranged their schedules to avoid seeing each other. Their relationship was extremely strained. Shannon often worked night shifts, while Joshua had a completely different schedule, causing them to barely see one another, according to the investigation. Shannon's life ended on November 27, 2014. After that day, all her banking transactions stopped. She ceased using the internet, and her phone went silent at noon. However, a signal from her phone was detected in an alley in the city the next morning. Joshua later claimed that he had found the phone at home. Interestingly, a few days later, Joshua also discovered Shannon's car, but could not explain how he found it. All of this seemed very suspicious to Officer Christine. Christine decided to speak to Joshua again. Meanwhile, an application to confiscate Joshua's phone had been filed, as he was increasingly considered a prime suspect in Shannon's case. In addition, the police decided to confiscate the car. On June 2, 2015, 7 months after Shannon's disappearance, Police Christine, along with other police, went to Joshua's house. They brought a search warrant to confiscate his cell phone and car. The officers knocked on the door and asked to enter the house. But initially, Joshua did not answer. After a while, he responded to the police and announced that he would be coming out soon. It appeared that Joshua was moving around inside, possibly trying to buy time to hide something. He answered the second police call, but explained the delay by saying that he was looking for his pants. Joshua spoke from behind a closed door and was asked to come out. Regardless of his appearance, the police sensed that something important was happening inside. They were prepared for any eventuality, including the use of weapons. Suddenly, he burst into tears and confessed to killing Shannon. After some persuasion, he finally opened the door. The police entered and saw Joshua bleeding. On the floor next to him was a military knife, which he had used to commit end life. He was rushed to the hospital. Joshua had lost a significant amount of blood, but he was not in critical condition and did not require surgery. The doctors were able to stitch up his wound. A psychiatric evaluation was needed to determine whether he was a danger to himself or others. When Joshua was taken into the interrogation room, he only said that he would confess his love to Shannon if he could see her alive, and he did not say anything else. Meanwhile, the police searched Joshua's home with the help of sniffer dogs. Later, they discovered a body buried in the yard, and during the excavation, they found enough evidence to secure a conviction. However, they still wanted to obtain a confession and hear Joshua's account of the events. On the second day after his arrest, Joshua provided a detailed account of the events on the day Shannon went missing. He returned home and found her sitting on the couch. She appeared very upset and immediately accused him of cheating, calling him a traitor for the affair. In a fit of rage, she lost control and said many harsh words to him, unable to bear her accusations. Joshua tried to cover her mouth with his hand. In response, Shannon bit him and continued to insult him, expressing her disgust at his attempts to touch her. In a fit of rage, Joshua grabbed Shannon by the neck and began to strangle her until she stopped breathing. When he realized she was dead, he became frightened and was unable to call an ambulance because she was dead. When Joshua recounted this, he became emotional, cried, and clearly felt remorse for his actions. Finally, the confession brought him relief after 8 long months of carrying this secret. During this time, Shannon's body lay in their home. Despite being checked twice by the police, they ignored the containers on the back porch, which were hidden under trash bags to avoid detection. Joshua Burgess was charged with second-degree murder. Shannon's family eventually learned the truth about what had happened, shocking everyone to discover that the killer had been near them the entire time. Even helping to find Shannon, Joshua's trial attracted considerable public and media attention. Despite his remorse, Joshua did not want to make his confession public and refused to attend the trial. Shannon's family believed that he was a coward who did not dare to face Shannon's loved ones. The prosecutor's office and the family contended that it was a premeditated murder and that he was still trying to hide the evidence. He acted as if nothing had happened. Hoping to escape prosecution and punishment at the last minute, the jury found Joshua Burgess guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. With the possibility of parole after 10 years, the family of the Shannon was unhappy with this sentence. They believed that it was Joshua's lifestyle that led to the end of Shannon's life.
It was a quiet December night. The children were asleep, and the house was peaceful. However, something terrible was happening behind a closed door. By the next day, Lindsay Quay had disappeared. There were no phone calls, no notes, just silence and a strange account from the man who lived with her. Initially, no one knew what to make of it, but as time went on, the truth began to emerge. What really occurred that night in Southport? Lindsay Wilson was born in the seaside town of Southport, near Liverpool. As one of 6 children in a loving and supportive family, Lindsay flourished in the caring environment provided by her parents. She had a strong bond with her siblings, especially her brother, Peter Wilson, who was just a year older. They shared laughter, secrets, and close friendships. Lindsay had a magnetic personality that attracted others, radiating energy, compassion, and joy. Her life changed dramatically in 1995. Lindsay had first become involved with Madill Quay when she was 17 and pregnant by another man. Her brother introduced them. He worked with Madill at a local casino. What started as a promising relationship quickly escalated into a passionate romance. Within a week, they were engaged, and just weeks later, they were married. However, the celebration was muted. Mitchell's family was largely absent from the wedding, with only his brother, Elliot Quay, present. On that same day, Lindsay's father witnessed their first argument, a troubling sign of the difficulties that lay ahead, although no one could have anticipated just how severe their challenges would become. Mitchell grew up in Essex, but relocated to Southport as a teenager after the tragic loss of his mother, with a father frequently absent for work and a younger brother to look after. Mitchell had to mature quickly and face life on his own. This hardship transformed into a more troubling side of his character. In the early stages of his marriage, Mitchell's initial charm disappeared, revealing a harsh and unyielding personality. He became possessive and unpredictable, insisting that everything go his way. Lindsay, who had hoped for a stable life, now felt completely trapped. 6 weeks after the wedding, Lindsay's daughter, Robin, was born. Mitchell began to disappear for days at a time, leaving Lindsay and Robin while he pursued affairs and wild nights. When he returned, he brought roses and offered apologies. This created a cycle of abuse that only grew tighter. Desperate to hold on to the man she once loved, Lindsay repeatedly forgave him. However, each forgiveness made her feel more diminished. Mitchell's control over her became more deceptive. He started to distance her from everyone important in her life, friends, siblings, and even her father, who had always been her protector. Gradually, he made himself the sole influence in her life. Lindsay found herself increasingly isolated, with every escape route blocked by the man who claimed to love her. 18 months after they married, Lindsay sought to escape her situation and turned to a local support center for single mothers, where she found a place to live. For a short time, she felt some relief. However, Mitchell tracked her down, filled with apologies, promises, and tears, which led them back into the same toxic cycle. Lindsay returned home, and soon after, she became pregnant again, hoping this new start might bring change. She approached her pregnancy with quiet determination. She might have believed that the baby could transform Mitchell. Victims of abuse often suffer from misplaced guilt, feeling as though they triggered the pain they endure. Unfortunately, nothing improved. Lindsay's mum reveals she stopped visiting her daughter because she didn't want to see Mitchell, and that the last time she saw her was on December 13th. On Christmas Eve, Mitchell visited Mrs. Wilson to collect the children's presents and told her that Lindsay was getting ready to go out. While the family felt uncomfortable, they weren't overly worried, as her absence had started to feel normal. However, as the holidays went by, without any news from Lindsay, their concern grew stronger. It was 6 weeks before a social worker reported her missing. Due to Lindsay's history of domestic abuse, the police responded quickly. Mitchell claimed that Lindsay had left just before Christmas, when she packed her bags and walked away, never to return. He insisted that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. However, both Lindsay's family and investigators found his account suspicious and doubted his statements. By April the following year, police discovered Mitchell had been withdrawing benefits in Lindsay's name. They arrested him on suspicion of murder, solicitation to cause grievous bodily harm, and fraud. Although he downplayed the seriousness of his actions, his comments unsettled those who heard them. He stated he wouldn't even help her if she were in danger after what she did to him and the kids. As time went on, suspicions about Mitchell intensified. He appeared completely untroubled and showed no signs of sadness. He gave interviews, portraying himself as a victim who had been deserted. However, investigators weren't fooled by his performance. They suspected that Lindsay never left the house alive, but they lacked evidence, no body, no confession, and no clear proof. The central question was, where was Lindsay Quay? While Lindsay's family desperately searched for her, Mitchell seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight. With cameras rolling and reporters watching, he presented himself not as a grieving partner, but as someone who thrived on the attention. Mitchell even sent the detective a Christmas card with a bottle of hair dye and a note telling him to get rid of the gray hair to feel more confident. He reported to the authorities that he had seen Lindsay around town, specifically near shops, and in a black Mercedes with another man. He insisted she was nearby and that he could recognize her, yet no one else ever spotted her. He depicted himself as a victim of suspicion rather than tragedy. His statements were inconsistent and lacked any evidence to support them. Despite thorough forensic investigations, no conclusive evidence was found in the home he had shared with Lindsay. Investigators did discover significant purchases of cleaning supplies, which raised concerns, but without a body or evidence of wrongdoing. The case has reached a standstill. While Mitchell misled the media and law enforcement, Lindsay's family faced overwhelming silence. Her father, Peter, spearheaded a persistent search for her. He distributed flyers throughout neighborhoods to seek help and to confront Mitchell with Lindsay's image daily. He scoured canals, ditches, and muddy woods, holding on to hope but increasingly feeling despair. Peter suspected Mitchell was involved, but without a body, a confession, or any closure, he was left with grief and unanswered questions. Each week, Peter confronted a terrifying reality as he picked up his grandchildren from the man he believed killed his daughter. He maintained a calm voice and neutral expression, but beneath his composed facade was an anger he struggled to contain for Lindsay, for her children, and for the elusive truth. A pivotal moment occurred on June 9th, several months after Lindsay went missing, when police officially declared her dead. On the same day, they arrested Mitchell for her murder. During police questioning, he declined to provide any information, repeating the phrase "no comment." The evidence against him was weak. just bits of circumstantial evidence and a pattern of troubling behavior. Then, unexpectedly, after only one night in custody, Mitchell confessed. He revealed that he had killed Lindsay on December 16, 1998. That evening, they argued in their bedroom, just steps away from where their two young children were sleeping. Lindsay allegedly said she wanted a divorce. Mitchell grabbed her by the neck and held her to the floor for 20 minutes. He then placed her body in the bedroom and sealed the door with a towel to prevent her two children from smelling the corpse. In the following 48 hours, Mitchell committed a horrifying act. In the attic of their family home, he dismembered Lindsay's body. He didn't do this alone. His brother Elliot, who had previously worked in a butcher shop, assisted him. Police believe Elliot's experience helped minimize evidence and avoid mistakes. Elliot Quay was not known for being independent. Investigators described him as having limited cognitive abilities and likely needing special care. His life centered around his older brother, Mitchell, who had a significant influence on him. Unfortunately, this influence led Elliot into a dark situation. After confessing to a murder, Mitchell guided investigators to where he had hidden the remains of Lindsay. The discoveries were disturbing. Miss Quay's dismembered body was found in a shallow grave near a roller coaster at Pleasureland in the seaside resort of Southport, Merseyside. Her arms and legs were later found wrapped in plastic bags in separate places on a railway embankment. A bin bag containing her head and hands, believed to have been buried in 200,000 tons of rubbish at a Lancashire landfill site, has never been recovered. One disturbing detail emerged during the investigation. Mitchell likely disposed of Lindsay's remains while out walking with his children. This cold and calculated approach, using casual outings as a disguise, was both unsettling and clever, as he knew how to avoid suspicion. In January 2001, the case went to trial at Liverpool Crown Court. However, before the trial began, Mitchell attempted to change his confession. He claimed he hadn't killed Lindsay, but had only dismembered and discarded her body. His story was so far-fetched that even his own legal team urged him to drop it. Ultimately, Mitchell pleaded guilty to all charges. The court found him guilty not only of murder, but also of obstructing justice and misleading law enforcement. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Meanwhile, Elliot received a 7-year sentence, which many members of Lindsay's family felt was too lenient. The outcome brought some relief, but it did not bring peace. Sadly, just 3 months after the sentencing, the family faced another heartbreaking tragedy. Lindsay's brother, Peter Wilson Jr., was found dead in the attic of their childhood home. He had taken his own life, leaving no note, but those who knew him understood the reason. Peter had never forgiven himself for introducing Lindsay to Mitchell. In the months following her death, he fell into a deep depression, isolating himself and overwhelmed by guilt. He often expressed that his life felt meaningless without his sister. Tragically, it was his father, who had already been burdened by Lindsay's loss, who discovered Peter's body. At that time, Peter's fiancée was pregnant, meaning another child would grow up without knowing their father, yet another victim of the devastation caused by Mitchell's actions. In 2017, Mitchell became eligible for parole. Lindsay's daughter, Robin, who was only 22 at the time, started a campaign to stop his release. She created a petition on Facebook that gathered thousands of signatures and became a powerful call for justice. The public's anger contributed to the rejection of Mitchell's parole requests. By 2022, he had been denied parole 3 times. His ongoing manipulative behavior in prison, such as aggressive outbursts and involvement in illegal substances smuggling, reinforced the arguments against his release. Lindsay's children, Robin and Jack, were brought up by Wilson family in a loving and stable environment, which was the kind of upbringing their mother always wished for them. Their story today serves as a powerful reminder that there are often people behind closed doors who are quietly asking for help. Lindsay Quay's 1998 murder by Mitchell Quay tore through her family and Southport's quiet streets. Her cheerful spirit, the light to her children, Robin and Jack, was lost in a barbaric act. The pain deepened when her brother, Peter Wilson Jr., took his own life. Despite this, the Wilson family found strength. Robin's courageous fight kept Mitchell in prison, honoring her mother's love. Southport's community rallied, sharing flyers and holding vigils to keep Lindsay's name alive and warn against domestic abuse. Meanwhile, her unrecovered remains leave an ache, but Robin and Jack thrive in the caring home Lindsay always wanted. Her story begs us to notice those trapped in silence, to offer help, and to hold loved ones close before it's too late. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information. He unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the grey car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, The two police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30th, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, He served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Arliss Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes.
Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alice Trappler. On April 19, 2012, an incident occurred in a remote area of upstate New York. At approximately 11 p.m., Frank Bennett called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his son, Daniel Bennett. After the attack, the intruder fled the scene. Frank reported that he did not witness the crime. He was in the basement when he heard the front door open and the lights turn on. A short time later, he heard a loud bang. Frank quickly ran upstairs, but when he reached the first floor, he only heard the sound of cars on the street. The mysterious intruder was gone, leaving behind a lifeless body. When the police arrived, they found Frank outside the house, in shock at what he had witnessed. The father could not believe that his beloved son was dead, and he was also afraid that the killer might return. After calming down, Frank's account was confirmed. The police entered the house and found Daniel lying on the sofa in the living room. It appeared that he had been attacked unexpectedly while he was sleeping. After examining the crime scene, forensic experts quickly discovered a spent ammunition box outside the door. It was clear that this was not a robbery because no valuables were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The attacker had acted quickly, suggesting that the murder occurred in just a few seconds. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. Given the situation, the police suspected that it might be due to personal reasons. They began investigating Daniel's family and friends to gather more information. Frank suggested a possible motive for this violent act. His son was scheduled to appear in court the next day to fight for custody of his 5-month-old daughter, Lily. The divorce with Alice had been very difficult. Police considered Daniel's wife, Alice Trappler, to be the prime suspect in the case. Alice Trappler grew up in a small town called Edison. However, she was born in Philadelphia, where she lived with her parents before they bought a farm away from the city to raise their children. After graduating from high school, Alice moved away, attended college, and began working on a construction site in Texas. She eventually returned to Philadelphia and became a successful landscape designer. Alice was an energetic girl from a small town. As a child, she was a bit mischievous, but that did not affect her close relationship with her parents. She often drove 4 hours to Edison to visit them on weekends. During one of these visits, she met Thomas Wesley Borden, who became her first husband. This meeting took place in 2002. He had a troubled past, having dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Then a series of troubles began to plague him. Thomas often stole small items, had no steady job, and frequently worked as a repairman on local farms. This was his situation when he met Alice. He immediately fell in love with her vibrant and energetic personality. Thomas was attracted to Alice's natural beauty and intelligence. They had similar personalities, as they were both energetic and outgoing. At the time, Alice was in a relationship with another man, but she ended it for Thomas, and their romance quickly blossomed. Within 6 months, they were married and moved to Philadelphia, where Alice owned a house. Thomas supported Alice in everything. Alice had always dreamed of having a large family, but she struggled to conceive. Therefore, she took on the role of stepmother to Thomas's 2 daughters from a previous marriage. However, after only a few months of living together, Alice realized that she did not truly understand Thomas and had rushed into the marriage. At first, she tried to control their situation, but soon discovered that Thomas was unpredictable and irresponsible. He would often leave home for days at a time, leaving Alice and the children behind. This behavior frustrated Alice, while Thomas grew tired of her worries. Moreover, he showed little concern for Alice's feelings. Although she tried to maintain the marriage for 4 years, Alice eventually lost patience. She did not want to leave Thomas's children, to whom she was very attached, in the care of their irresponsible father. So, she filed for divorce and also requested custody. In 2009, a challenging trial began, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, they reached an agreement that the girls would live with their paternal grandparents, who would take good care of them. Thomas's children still visit Alice in Edison regularly. After moving in with her mother in 2010, Alice bought an old farmhouse. She renovated the house, making use of her construction skills. Her business is thriving and is expected to grow even more in the near future. Overall, her life has improved significantly since the divorce. She has yet to realize her dream of having children of her own and rarely sees Thomas's children. Living alone has become boring for her. Her life changed dramatically when a new man, Daniel Bennett, entered her life. They met online in late 2010. He also grew up on a farm and is a strong man who always helps his parents with hard work. Daniel has a stubborn personality and can be rude, but he has never been in trouble with the law. In February 2011, Alice learned that she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she shared the news with Daniel, who was also delighted and decided to move in with her. They soon got married, but Alice's controlling nature soon emerged. She wanted to control every aspect of their lives, while Daniel valued his freedom and did not like being controlled. This led to frequent minor disagreements. These conflicts escalated, resulting in increasingly irrational arguments over small issues, which left Daniel frustrated. Just 6 months after meeting, the couple decided to split after Alice hit Daniel over the head with a coffee pot. He moved out, calling her crazy, and returned to live with his parents. However, Daniel still wanted to be involved in his daughter's life after she was born and sought to share custody, so he made an effort to maintain a relationship with Alice. Daniel contacted her almost every day to check on her well-being, but Alice never responded. She ignored all his messages, which frustrated him. Their relationship was strained. Alice often behaved rudely and even threatened him. She said that their communication felt like a conflict. In addition, she refused to see him and was hostile on the phone. It seemed that she did not want to maintain a relationship with him and did not want him to be a part of their child's life. 7 months after their separation, a baby girl was born. Alice did not inform Daniel about the birth and forbade him from seeing the child. This was a significant blow to Daniel, who had been pleading to see his daughter. However, Alice remained steadfast in her decision. So Daniel sought legal help to resolve the situation. According to the lawyer, the mother had no right to deny the father access to his daughter, but to prove this, a trial was necessary. Consequently, Daniel filed a lawsuit in family court to gain access to his child. The proceedings could be lengthy. Finally, a court date was set for April 20. This was a hopeful moment for Daniel, but the hearing never took place. He was murdered in his home the day before. Officers who arrived at the scene spoke to neighbors, some of whom confirmed hearing a loud bang just before an SUV drove away. The front door of the house was open, and Daniel was found dead. The only evidence was a spent 12-gauge cartridge case. A ballistics test is pending, which may provide further clues. Frank said that Daniel often complained about Alice's controlling behavior, especially after they split up when she forbade him from visiting their daughter. After breaking up with Alice, Daniel moved in with his father. On the day Daniel was killed, he was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day at work and fell asleep just before he was murdered. Frank also recalled that last Christmas, Alice called him out of the blue and asked to meet so he could see his granddaughter. He was delighted and agreed, but he used the opportunity to convince Alice to allow Daniel to see their child. He believed that children should have a relationship with both their father and mother. However, Alice became defensive and firmly stated that she would never allow Daniel to see their child. Frank was extremely upset, feeling that Alice's decision was both illegal and unjustified. He believed that Daniel would make a great father and saw no justification for Alice's restrictions. After Alice's call, Daniel sought legal help and went to court, but his hearing was repeatedly postponed until it was rescheduled. Tragically, a murderer disrupted all his plans. The police quickly established a motive for the crime, believing that the connection was not random. First, they needed to talk to Alice, who arrived at the courthouse at around 5 a.m., the day after the murder. Just hours later, Lily's custody hearing took place. The police considered her the prime suspect, and at that time, she was living in Edison, 30 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. Alice was surprisingly calm when she heard the news of her ex-husband's death. When the police spoke to Alice, it was clear that she was very angry with him. She recounted that he had often insulted her and had been abusive throughout their time together. Alice described Daniel as a bad person who struggled with drug addiction. She also mentioned that they were in a custody battle over their daughter, a legal struggle that Daniel had initiated, and that she was determined not to give in to him. Despite this hostility, Alice insisted that she had nothing to do with the murder. She claimed that she had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating that she was at home with her mother, who later confirmed her story. When asked about a handgun, Alice denied ever having used it, and the police confirmed that the weapon was not registered in her name. However, this did not eliminate her as a suspect, as she could have purchased the weapon illegally, and her alibi was not entirely reliable. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any information that could advance the case. They then chose to investigate Daniel's other acquaintances and friends who might have had a motive for the crime. Many described Daniel as a difficult person who frequently got into fights at bars. As a result, the police identified several potential suspects who had conflicts with Daniel in various ways. They compiled a long list of these individuals and began interviewing them. Although each had grievances against Daniel, none had a strong motive for the murder. The investigation was losing momentum, and it was clear that a vital lead was needed, as there were too many angry residents in the city who might want to take revenge on him. It was necessary to narrow down the list of suspects. One of Daniel's neighbors went to the police station after the murder. While she was getting the mail, she discovered a shotgun shell casing on the road. Concerned, she reported her discovery to the sheriff's department. At first glance, the shell casing did not seem unusual since hunting season had just begun, and many people in rural areas used that type of ammunition. However, because it was close to the crime scene, it had the potential to be important evidence. When the police arrived, they compared the shell casing to the one that caused Daniel's death. They found that they were an exact match. The police were then able to trace the shell casing to the store where it was purchased. They searched the area around where the shell casing was found and discovered 3 more shell casings. All of these had been purchased from the hunting section of a local Walmart. This discovery provided a vital lead in the investigation. The police requested surveillance footage from the store and reviewed it. They identified a man who had purchased the boxes of ammunition just 4 hours before the murder, around 7 p.m. The footage clearly showed him, and the police were able to track him as he left the store, including his license plate, thanks to outdoor cameras. The police quickly identified the owner of one of the vehicles as Thomas West Borden, Alice's first husband. While this footage was not enough to convict him, it was a clue for the police to investigate Thomas further. They had 2 main suspects, Alice and Thomas. It was likely that they had planned to kill Daniel together. While Thomas could be considered a potential perpetrator or accomplice, the only evidence against him was the purchase of the ammunition. Alice was not officially considered a suspect because she had an alibi confirmed by her mother. The GPS on her phone showed that she was at home, but the seasoned police officer suspected that she might be the mastermind behind the events. The police contacted Thomas, asking him to come to the station for questioning without providing a specific reason. They hoped to indirectly confirm their suspicions through him. However, Thomas informed the police over the phone that he was out of town at the time of the call. He could not provide an exact date for his return, saying that he could be absent for 2 weeks to a month due to important business. He then stated that unless the police had a warrant for his arrest, he had no intention of going to the police station over a minor matter. This situation raised suspicion, and he understood why they wanted to talk to him. As the phone conversation continued, Thomas became increasingly anxious. At one point, he suddenly declared that he would kill himself if the pressure did not ease. The police realized the urgency of the situation and knew that they needed to quickly locate Thomas before he did anything drastic. They decided to track the GPS location of the call and found him near a cell tower in a suburb of Philadelphia, along with his car. Soon, the pursuit began. The chase lasted only a few blocks before Thomas abandoned his pickup truck in a parking lot and fled on foot. However, another police unit arrived to stop him. Thomas gave a false name, but when asked for identification, he surrendered his driver's license. When the officers discovered the lie, they acted quickly to arrest him. Thomas began to run away again, leading several cars and police officers to chase him. They pursued him to the nearest train tracks, possibly because he intended to use the train to escape and distract the police. However, Thomas was exhausted and realized that he could not outrun them. In a moment of desperation, he jumped in front of a train and took his own life. Some even blamed the police for his death. This development left the police without their only lead regarding Daniel's murder. In their desperation, the police decided to talk to people who had interacted with Thomas in the days before his death. Thomas's half-brother Nathan Hand lived with him. Shortly before Daniel's murder, Thomas had moved in with Nathan, and they spent a lot of time together. During this period, Thomas rekindled his relationship with Alice and felt happy, as he had struggled to cope with their breakup. He had hoped to reunite with her, so he agreed to resume contact. However, Nathan suspected that Alice had an ulterior motive for returning to Thomas. Nathan said that just before the incident, Alice had made a request regarding Daniel. For the sake of the person he loved, Thomas agreed to everything and followed Alice's instructions. Nathan recalled that at around 8 p.m. on April 19, Thomas returned from Walmart and quickly began preparing for something important, saying that he would confront Daniel at Alice's request. Nathan observed that Thomas was wearing camouflage pants, a dark shirt, and a mask. When asked about his plans, Thomas insisted that he would confront Daniel. Nathan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Thomas asked Nathan to drive him to Daniel's house. During the drive, Thomas revealed that he not only intended to beat Daniel, but also to kill him. He was determined to get rid of Daniel once and for all. Despite Nathan's attempts to convince him otherwise, Thomas also mentioned that this plan originated with Alice. He kept in touch with her throughout the evening via phone and text messages. When they arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m., Thomas retrieved the weapons from the trunk of the car. He claimed that Alice had given him the weapons for this purpose and that he had purchased the ammunition. They got out of the car and stood on either side of the front door. Nathan pushed the door open and turned on the lights, allowing Thomas to rush inside and kill Daniel. They then fled the scene, jumping into the car and driving away. As they left, Thomas threw the remaining shell casings out the window, landing in a neighbor's yard and eventually leading the police to their door. Nathan claimed that they buried the weapons at the park. Police were able to locate the weapon based on Nathan's description. He also mentioned that Alice was not present during the attack. She was at home and was in contact with Thomas on the phone. Nathan was arrested in connection with the crime. On April 24, a deputy sheriff visited Alice's home, and she denied any involvement in the crime. In 2013, Alice went to trial for the murder of Daniel Bennett. She was charged with multiple crimes, facing a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. By this time, Thomas, the real perpetrator, was dead. The prosecution argued that he was just a pawn controlled by the real mastermind behind the crime. They believed that Alice had planned and manipulated Thomas into carrying out the act. The prosecution gathered a significant amount of evidence that linked Alice to the crime. Evidence included correspondence between her and Thomas discussing the case, as well as surveillance camera footage showing Thomas purchasing ammunition. Additionally, Thomas's half-brother Nathan confirmed Alice's involvement in the crime. Nathan Hand reached a plea deal to shorten his sentence by pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for helping to solve the case, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. The defense attempted to exonerate Alice, acknowledging her hostility toward Daniel. They argued that the situation was an act of self-defense, claiming that Alice had endured domestic violence for 6 months. They asserted that Alice, a victim of violence as a child, was determined to prevent her daughter from experiencing the same, which explained her strong opposition to sharing custody with Daniel. After deliberations, the jury unanimously convicted Alice Trapler of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Throughout the trial, she remained calm, showing no remorse or emotion. Alice expressed dissatisfaction with her 25-year prison sentence and filed several appeals, all of which were rejected. On the evening of September 10, 2012, a small village in France was quiet, but something life-changing was about to unfold inside one home. Jacqueline Savage had lived in fear for nearly 50 years, trapped in a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to escape. That night, everything reached a breaking point. Her husband, Norbert Moreau, was sitting on the terrace, drinking whiskey as he had all day. Moments before, the house had been filled with his shouting, threats, and the sound of another strike. Jacqueline had experienced this too many times before, but this time was different. Instead of waiting for the chaos to end, she walked to the cabinet, retrieved a hunting rifle, and loaded it. She stepped onto the terrace, took a deep breath, and did something she never thought she would. A gunshot echoed. How everything led up to this moment and what would unfold next was just beginning. Jacqueline Savage was born on December 27, 1947, in Montargis, France. Little is known about her early life, except that her mother was a victim of domestic violence. She grew up in a large family, with 5 brothers and 2 sisters. At just 16, Jacqueline met Norbert, a charming young man who was only a month older than her. His charm made him popular with women, but he chose Jacqueline. Their youthful romance quickly turned into a passionate love affair. Jacqueline's relationship changed dramatically when she became pregnant at 17. On June 5, 1965, she decided to marry Norbert, despite her mother's strong objections and her siblings' unanimous disapproval, who thought she was making a big mistake. Jacqueline was in love and, like many young women, dreamed of having a home and family. Their first daughter was born in 1966, followed by a second daughter while Norbert was away from home completing his military service. During this time, Jacqueline trained as a seamstress. 4 years later, they built their dream home in a beautiful village 80 kilometers south of Paris. The house, made of wood and stone, had a large garden and terrace, making it an ideal place to start a new chapter in their lives. It was here that they welcomed their 3rd and 4th children. As the years went by, Norbert's work life declined significantly. In 1981, he was let go due to professional misconduct. Struggling financially, he and Jacqueline started their own independent transport business. Jacqueline took care of the administration and deliveries. By 1989, their 2 children joined the family business, which had grown to include wine sales. Over the years, Jacqueline managed to secure her retirement benefits but continued to work. As their children became adults, they went their separate ways, except for only son, who remained single. By the time Jacqueline turned 65, she had 11 grandchildren. She still lived with Norbert in their home and was actively involved in a local hunting association. Though they seemed like a loving, close family on the outside, there was a troubling and tragic reality beneath the surface, one that would soon take the world by surprise. On the evening of September 10, 2012, around 7:30 p.m., Jacqueline took a hunting rifle from the cabinet. She went to the basement to fetch the cartridges and then went out onto the terrace where Norbert was sitting with a glass of whiskey. Without any hesitation, she attacked him 3 times in the back. Afterward, Jacqueline called emergency services calmly. By the time they arrived, Norbert was dead. The incident occurred the day after Jacqueline's son took his own life. Jacqueline claimed that Mr. Moreau had physically and abused his wife, daughter, and son. She stated that she acted out of fear for her own life and her children's safety. That morning, Norbert had made new threats, vowing to carry them out. Jacqueline claimed that the attacking was the end of 47 years of constant domestic abuse, which had not only ruined her life but had also left lasting wounds on their children. During her initial court appearance, Jacqueline described how she first recognized Norbert's true character, characterized by violent outbursts. The first time he hit her was after a dinner party at a friend's house, where she had received compliments about her appearance. Out of nowhere, he struck her hard across the face, leaving her shocked and speechless. As time went on, the physical violence, abuse, and verbal attacks became part of her everyday life. Their children were all affected, with her son bearing the brunt of his father's psychological cruelty. Norbert would belittle, humiliate, and break him down mentally. The daughters suffered even more. 2 of them were subjected to their father's abuse. Whenever Norbert lost his temper, he would lash out indiscriminately. The girls learned to stay silent, endure the pain, and hope it would end quickly. The violence started with slaps and gradually intensified to cruel insults, severe beatings, and acts of humiliation. At one point, he struck Jacqueline with a motorcycle helmet, leaving her with a permanent scar on her forehead. For nearly 50 years, Jacqueline lived in suffering. In her testimony, Jacqueline initially excused Norbert's behavior, attributing it to his tough childhood. She hoped they would eventually become a normal, loving family. But as time went on, the violence became commonplace, and fear of retaliation kept her silent. Their daughter, Fabienne, tried to break this silence. As a teenager, she ran away and reported to the police that her father had abused her. However, instead of taking action, the police officer merely warned Norbert. Fearing the repercussions, Fabienne felt compelled to withdraw her statement, leaving her father unpunished. This enraged him even more. Jacqueline, meanwhile, was terrified of what would happen to her and her children if she left, especially since she had no financial independence. All their bank accounts were in Norbert's name. She felt trapped and reflected, what would she have done with 4 children? She stayed to protect them. Jacqueline felt trapped in her situation. Norbert controlled not only their home but also isolated her from her family. Her parents and siblings had distanced themselves, refusing to intervene, and she had lost all her friends. The only people she interacted with were those in Norbert's tightly knit circle. There was a dark time when she considered ending her life. Most days, she just endured the abuse, waiting for it to stop. However, the night she killed Norbert was different. She noticed something unsettling in his eyes and a menacing tone in his voice that deeply scared her. In that moment, she could vividly imagine her children lying lifeless in front of her, same her son had been. On that day, he stormed into the bedroom, slammed the door, and threatened her, saying, "This time, he'll finish she off." Then he forcefully grabbed her, dragging her through the kitchen, into the hallway. He physically assaulted her and yelled that he would kill her children, whom he called the brats, and that he would also kill her. In that moment, something inside her broke. Earlier that day, they had argued about business. Norbert had started drinking around 11 a.m. and became increasingly irritable as the day went on. At one point, Jacqueline had locked herself in the bedroom to rest, taking some sedatives. By 7:30 p.m., he burst into the room, slapped her hard across the face, and insulted her, calling her lazy and demanding that she prepare dinner. After that, he poured himself another drink. He sat outside on the terrace, vowing to eliminate them all. Jacqueline remembered standing there, tasting the blood from her lip after his latest attack. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The preliminary investigation revealed an injury on her lip, but no other significant signs of violence on her body. No sedatives were found in her system. Her trial occurred nearly 2 years later, on October 23, 2014, and gained national attention, sparking discussions about domestic violence and self-defense laws in France. In court, Jacqueline pleaded not guilty, and her defense claimed she acted to protect herself. She detailed years of brutal beatings, humiliation, and abuse from her husband. The judge persistently questioned her about why she never reported the abuse to the authorities. Jacqueline explained that she remained silent to survive. She understood that revealing the truth would lead to unbearable consequences. She shared her feelings of fear, shame, and the constant control Norbert had over her life. She recalled how she had often waited for his angry outbursts to subside, for her injuries to heal, and for the day she could finally escape. Finally, her son's death became unbearable for her. Journalists at the trial noted that she seemed distant and withdrawn, often going silent when the court questioned her. Jacqueline stated that they feared Norbert, and despite some complaints from his victims, nothing ever changed. Her 3 daughters also testified in court. The youngest, who experienced both physical and emotional abuse since she was 16, described her father as a monster. They all confirmed that Norbert had a volatile relationship with their brother, often resulting in physical fights. Their testimonies were crucial in revealing the ongoing cycle of abuse in their family and the desperation that led their mother to take action. Neighbors who testified described Norbert as a violent and intimidating individual. One woman candidly expressed her relief at his death, stating that Jacqueline had done them all a favor. A longtime friend of the couple characterized Norbert as impulsive and aggressive, frequently erupting in anger. After a challenging 5-day trial, Jacqueline's lawyers, who specialize in domestic abuse cases, argued for a broad interpretation of self-defense. They sought her complete exoneration, highlighting that she had suffered psychological and physical abuse for long time. They argued that she was well aware of Norbert's capacity to follow through on his threats. In contrast, the prosecution maintained that this was not a genuine case of self-defense, pointing out that Norbert had been shot in the back and that several minutes had elapsed since his last attack. They sought a 14-year prison sentence. On October 28, 2014, Jacqueline was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The judges criticized her for not showing remorse, arguing that she portrayed herself as a victim instead of expressing regret. They referenced French law, which states that self-defense must be an immediate and proportional response to an unjust attack. The verdict led to widespread outrage throughout France, with thousands protesting in support of Jacqueline. Demonstrators condemned the court for not understanding the realities of domestic violence and coercive control. Following the trial, Jacqueline unintentionally became a symbol in the fight against gender-based violence. Her case sparked a national discussion about the prolonged suffering of victims in abusive relationships. A support committee was quickly established, gaining backing from the mayor of Paris, environmental activists, and left-wing politicians. Some women held a dramatic protest outside the prison where Jacqueline was incarcerated, they wearing flower crowns while they began symbolically digging a tunnel, as if trying to free her. Jacqueline's lawyers worked hard to secure her early release. The strong public support greatly encouraged her. Despite suffering from bronchitis and chronic back pain, she was touched to see the first protest in her honor. In August 2015, a local court in Madill denied her request for parole, claiming she had not expressed enough remorse. However, due to continued public pressure, a second hearing was held on December 3, 2015. Her daughters campaigned vigorously for her freedom, emphasizing that she had endured a lifetime of mistreatment and did not deserve to spend her final years in prison. Nonetheless, the Paris Court of Appeals upheld the original sentence. Their only remaining option was to seek a reduction of her sentence. Public outrage over Jacqueline's conviction was so strong that it caught the president's attention. On December 22, 2016, Jacqueline's daughters arranged a meeting with the then-president to ask for his help in securing a pardon for their mother. Just 2 days later, he granted a partial pardon using a rarely invoked constitutional power. He urged the courts to impose the minimum sentence possible, which resulted in a reduction of her prison term by 2 years and 4 months. A petition launched on Change to ask the French president to pardon Ms. Savage gathered 435,971 signatures. On February 26, 2017, a French television program called September à Huit received an extremely high viewership of 5 million people due to a segment describing Jacqueline Savage. In addition, politicians spoke out in support of Ms. Savage, forming a support committee, including Anne Hidalgo and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. After the presidential pardon was announced, a major debate broke out among lawyers and criminal law experts about whether the rule of law was respected. Their view was that the media had overturned 2 consecutive court decisions by influencing the public, who then pushed for the presidential pardon. Jacqueline's newfound freedom lasted exactly 4 years. She passed away in her home on July 23, 2020, at the age of 72, after being diagnosed with a terminal illness. To this day, she remains a significant figure in France's history, remembered as both a victim of extreme domestic abuse and a catalyst for change in the country's legal system. Kitzbühel is a small Austrian town located, with a population of just over 8,000 people. Despite its size, more than 20,000 tourists visit every winter, drawn by the local mountain slopes. For many decades, this place has been known as a winter resort for the wealthy. Additionally, there are numerous celebrations that attract athletes and fans from around the world. Since October 2018, the ski slopes have been prepared before the winter season. The hotels and tourism companies have been making the final preparations to welcome numerous guests. However, the joyful events were overshadowed by the horrific murders. Nadine Hinterholzer was born in Austria, grew up in a close-knit family. From an early age, she was energetic, cheerful, and quite pretty. She had a large circle of friends who loved her for her straightforwardness, good sense of humor, and pleasant demeanor. Nadine lived with her parents and older brother in a spacious house in Kitzbühel. At the age of 14, significant changes began in her life when she met a guy named Andreas E., who was 20 at the time. He already looked like an adult, while she was still a teenager. A 6-year age difference at that age can seem significant. Despite this, they felt a mutual attraction. After several dates, they began a romantic relationship in secret from Nadine's relatives. Eventually, they both realized that age could pose the greatest obstacle in their relationship. Nadine was concerned that her older boyfriend could face legal issues because of his involvement with a minor, but they were reluctant to break up. At first, Nadine carefully hinted to her parents about the significant changes in her life, which raised some alarms for her mother and father. However, Andreas was determined and decided to take a bold step. He personally approached Nadine's family to seek permission for their relationship. From the beginning, he emphasized that this was not a fleeting affair. He wanted to build a future with her but did not want to rush her, allowing her to finish school and pursue her education. Andreas was familiar with her brother, Kevin. Soon after meeting, they became close friends. During home visits, Andreas's initiative was highly appreciated by Nadine's parents, especially after she described him as well-mannered, polite, and loving. Overall, the family liked Andreas, so they permitted Nadine to continue their relationship. Nadine had just entered the challenging teenage years. Her parents believed that a relationship with an older boyfriend could positively influence her, as he could take care of her and protect her from unpleasant situations. Andreas acted as though Nadine meant a lot to him, growing closer to her family. Initially, they spent all their free time together, and after 3 years, Andreas moved in with them. Nadine and Andreas posted statuses on social media indicating their engagement. While Andreas had intentions of getting married, he respected Nadine's desires to finish school and make her own life decisions before rushing into marriage. They continued dating for several years, to the point where Nadine's family began to treat Andreas like their own son. Finally, Nadine turned 18, officially becoming an adult, while Andreas was already 24. They decided it was time to move out and live independently. Nadine's grandmother significantly assisted them by offering her apartment for Nadine and Andreas to settle in. By this time, Nadine had completed her schooling. She intended to continue her studies at college. She did not plan on marriage or children, which disappointed Andreas slightly, as she wanted to establish herself first. Nadine enrolled in driving school and attended classes with her friends, who often picked her up. She aspired to become a professional dancer and build a career in this field. To their relatives, Nadine and Andreas represented the epitome of romance. Although the age difference made their relationship seem unconventional, it was evident that their bond was built on love and mutual understanding. It seemed as though their lives were just beginning, with no threats on the horizon. Andreas had faced Nadine's transitional phase early in their relationship when she was just 14, and they had managed to cope with that difficult period, maintaining, even strengthening their bond. However, after she reached adulthood, some other challenges began to emerge in their relationship. Andreas was seriously determined to pursue further development, family life, and children, but he could not achieve the same aspirations from his beloved. A 24-year-old man, he worked as a bricklayer and spent the lion's share of his time, energy on his job. Upon returning home in the evening, he just wanted to relax with his girlfriend in their apartment, but this did not meet the new needs of an 18-year-old. While she had already become an adult, she still wanted to relax, spend time with friends, and go to parties. Previously, they had constantly gone out together, but now Andreas wanted to spend time at home in front of the TV, which was too boring for Nadine. Initially, she managed to persuade him to go for walks or spend time outside their home, but over time, this became nearly impossible. Andreas began to refuse such outings, citing fatigue and stating that he had to work in the morning. He complained that he wanted to relax and recharge but felt unsupported by her. During this period, the age difference between them became particularly apparent. Nadine was at the peak of her activity and craved entertainment, while she realized that Andreas had already moved past that phase of life, who now had other interests. However, she was not willing to adjust to him or give in. She wanted to live the life of a young woman, socialize, and have fun with her friends. All of this led to conflicts beginning to arise between them. Nadine even told Andreas that if this continued, she would have to break up with him. Despite her repeatedly expressing this not only to him but also to her friends and relatives, he did not take her words seriously. He saw no reason for a breakup, insisting that he still loved her, hoped she would calm down over time and everything would return to normal. He continued planning a lavish wedding, believing it was the right time since their relationship had lasted for 5 years. He wanted to change his social media status from engaged to married, but her insistence on remaining single, along with her constant reproaches and talk of breaking up, loomed over their relationship. Andreas increasingly became intrusive and rude. Nadine felt that he simply wanted to control her completely and grew angry that he could not succeed. She even began to tell her friends that they had always had problems that she had kept silent about. In the summer of 2018, Nadine made the firm decision to break up, but she did not want any conflict. She hoped they could maintain a friendly relationship. At that time, she was 19 years old, and Andreas was already 25. According to Nadine, her boyfriend was never cruel or aggressive and did not limit her communication with others. The major issue was his passivity and jealousy. He could not stand it when she was in the company of other guys. She even lost all her male friends after meeting Andreas at the age of 14. Nadine told her friend that they had decided to separate and live apart. She was sure that her boyfriend took it calmly. She believed their relationship was officially over after 5 years together. Nadine and Andreas stopped dating. He moved out of her grandmother's apartment and returned to his parents' house. The idea of maintaining friendly relations seemed to work as they both had mutual friends and kept in touch with their families. Andreas continued to be friends with Nadine's older brother, Kevin, as if nothing had happened. They were peers and had a lot in common. However, this was the calm before the storm. During this period, doubts began to surface during their communication. Nadine increasingly suspected that Andreas was not taking the breakup calmly. Kevin thought Andreas had accepted this as another whim of his girlfriend and was simply waiting for a signal from Nadine regarding the restoration of their relationship. The friends had discussed this many times. Andreas could not accept that it was truly over. Thoughts and conversations about his ex consumed almost all of his time. Andreas's behavior approached obsession. He seized every opportunity to communicate with Nadine, asking for a second chance, trying to win her back, even continuing to talk about marriage and children. Within the first month of the breakup, it became clear that Andreas did not understand the situation and was simply in denial. He did not realize that they were no longer a couple. Each time Nadine firmly said no, insisting that everything was over between them, she labeled their relationship as her youthful mistake, even confiding this to her other friends. All of this hurt Andreas, but he continued to endure. He still hoped for a reconciliation. Some of his friends sympathized with him, but by the end of the second month after the breakup, they too began to notice that his behavior resembled stalking. He showed up everywhere Nadine went, always initiating conversation. Andreas's persistence caused Nadine to start avoiding him. She tried to gently indicate that their relationship was over, but he only became more determined. When she tried to stop their meetings, he made efforts to interact with her. Nadine's friends and family knew that she was consistently rejecting his advances, but he was spreading different stories to his own circle. Even 2 months after the breakup, he still believed that she wanted to be with him and thought she was only trying to make him pursue her. Kevin tried to tell Andreas to move on and date other girls, but he remained stubborn. As of October 5, 2018, the situation remained unchanged. Nadine and Andreas had officially been separated for 3 months. Nadine's entire family was aware of the breakup. Even his parents tried to convince him to reconsider. That evening, Andreas spent time with Kevin. They visited several bars but didn't stay long in any of them. Eventually, they ended up at one bar, where Kevin unexpectedly saw Nadine. He found it surprising to run into her, especially since, despite the town being small, there were enough bars catering to tourists that it was unlikely they would see each other regularly. Andreas appeared to either be following Nadine, receiving updates on her location, or simply searching for her as he moved between various places throughout the evening. Kevin knew that for the past 3 months, Andreas had been claiming that he and Nadine loved each other and intended to get married once he won her back. While similar situations had occurred before, this time things were different. Nadine was not just with her friend, she was also accompanied by another man. When Andreas noticed this, he instantly became angry, approached Nadine, taking her hand and starting an argument. He attempted to pull her out of the bar, but she resisted. Her 24-year-old friend, Florian Janney, intervened, positioning himself between Andreas and Nadine. He insisted that he was merely a friend and not romantically involved with her, claiming they had only just met. Nonetheless, Andreas was not calmed by this explanation. He was furious that Nadine was spending time with another man and struggled to contain his anger, nearly provoking a fight in the bar. Nadine, Florian, and her brother worked hard to soothe him, prevented Andreas from asserting control over Nadine. After significant effort, they managed to calm him down, though he was still in tears. Feeling overwhelmed, Andreas chose to leave the bar, not wanting to remain in that environment. Kevin stayed behind with Nadine and Florian, worried about their safety. Andreas' outburst was alarming, and now Nadine felt genuinely concerned for her well-being. She didn't want to remain in the bar either, but feared that her ex might be waiting outside. After waiting to ensure Andreas had left, the entire group decided to walk Nadine home. Florian drove her back, even offered to stay the night to help her feel safe. Overwhelmed by fear, Nadine accepted his offer. This choice would prove to have significant consequences. Around 4 a.m., Andreas could no longer contain his jealousy and chose to contact his ex again. When he reached her house, he noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway, which he recognized as Florian's. It became clear that Andreas hadn't gone home after leaving the bar. Instead, he had remained in the parking lot, secretly watching the group. He observed that Florian was with Nadine, while no one else had left the house. This only fueled his anger. Andreas suspected that Nadine was lying and dating someone new. He felt they were enjoying themselves together without a care. He resolved to confront both Nadine and Florian about the situation. Furious, Andreas jumped out of his car and started ringing the doorbell while banging on the front door. Instead of Nadine and her friend, her father, 59-year-old Rupert, answered. He came out to calm Andreas, who was shouting. Rupert insisted it was too late for arguments and asked Andreas to leave until morning, when they could discuss everything calmly. Rupert was aware of the situation involving Florian at the bar, reassured Andreas that Nadine and Florian were just friends. Understanding and approachable, Rupert shared a cigarette with Andreas, invited him to talk outside on the street. They had a conversation on various topics, as Rupert probably hoped this would soothe Andreas and persuade him to leave. Having known each other for several years, Andreas had become a valued member of Nadine's family. Nadine's parents treated him well, which is why Rupert chose not to call the police to remove his daughter's ex-boyfriend. After speaking with Rupert, Andreas seemed to feel less agitated. He got into his car and drove off, while Rupert returned inside to go to bed. However, just a short distance down the road, Andreas began to feel annoyed again. He came back 15 minutes later, knocking on the door and ringing the bell, which disturbed everyone in the house. Nadine and Kevin came out to confront him. Unlike Rupert, they were very upset, wanted to make it clear that Andreas needed to leave. A new argument broke out at the front door, no one was holding back their words. Nadine was determined to completely cut off ties with her bothersome ex and insisted that there should be no further relationship between them. She demanded that he vanish from her life for good. Kevin backed his sister, stating that their friendship was overdue to Andreas's stalking behavior. He was worried about Andreas's unhealthy actions and wanted nothing more to do with him. Meanwhile, Andreas felt betrayed, convinced that Nadine had been unfaithful and that Kevin was protecting her. He now felt abandoned by Kevin, who he believed should have supported him instead. Before leaving, Andreas tried to find out if Nadine had cheated. However, she firmly told him it was not his concern since they hadn't been dating for several months. At that moment, Andreas had a shocking realization: Nadine had actually broken up with him 3 months ago, and all his attempts to win her back were in vain. No one expected him to pursue her anymore. Feeling angry, Andreas decided to go home, choosing to avoid confronting his feelings of hurt. At 5:30 a.m. on October 6, 2018, Andreas returned to his ex's house. He began knocking on the door and ringing the doorbell, but he did not shout. This time, Rupert responded. He was already very irritated because Andreas had kept the whole family awake the previous night. When Rupert opened the door, he intended to angrily chase Andreas away and threaten to call the police, but he was cut off before he could finish. Andreas pulled out a gun, shot him in the head twice, killing him instantly. He then stepped over Rupert's body and entered the house. Nadine's mother, 51-year-old Andrea, rushed outside when she heard the noise. Tragically, she became the next victim. Andreas then attacked Kevin. He went upstairs and attempted to enter Nadine's room, but Nadine and Florian had locked the door. Andreas determined that the quickest way to reach her was through the balcony. He went outside, climbed the bars on the building's facade, broke the window, opened fire on both Nadine and her friend Florian. This horrific event unfolded within just a few minutes, resulting in the deaths of 5 people. After committing the crime, Andreas drove to the Kitzbühel police station. He arrived around 6 a.m. and placed a gun in front of a police officer at the entrance. He confessed to having just shot 5 people. Additionally, he handed over a knife and a baseball bat, which he had used to break into the Hinterholzer home. He used the bat to shatter a window and gain access to Nadine's room. While the knife was never used, it appears he brought it along for safety. The police discovered 5 bodies at the scene, and the details of their deaths confirmed Andreas's account. Each victim had been attacked at close range with multiple bullets. Florian suffered gunshot wounds to his hands as he tried to defend himself. There was nothing missing from the house. The toxicology report indicated that Andreas was sober, with no alcohol or banned substance in his system. He had no prior legal issues. The entire community of Kitzbühel was in shock over the incident. In this close-knit town, crimes, especially such violent ones, were extremely rare. All the neighbors were familiar with the Nadine family, known for their kindness and helpfulness. They had good relationships with everyone in the area. Both the victim's family and the suspect's family were respected in the community. The community especially mourned the loss of Florian Janney, a talented young hockey player and goalkeeper, who was seen as a promising individual. His compassion for Nadine ultimately led to his tragic death. Friends who knew Nadine well later stated that she had no romantic involvement with Florian. They were simply friends who enjoyed good conversations. However, some speculated that Florian stayed the night to protect her and suggested that they might have already begun dating. Following the tragedy, a small memorial with photographs of the victims was set up in the local church. Over the course of the month it remained there. More than 1,000 heartfelt notes were left by mourners and caring individuals in memory of the victims. Andreas had been in custody in a special cell designed for inmates needing extra supervision. The police considered him at high risk for end one's own life, so they monitored him closely. He spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement and was allowed only 1 hour outside to walk in the yard. When the family of Andreas learned what had happened, they addressed the town's residents, expressed their condolences. They also informed the police that a gun belonging to Andreas's brother was missing. The brother had a permit for the firearm, which he kept at home for self-defense. Unfortunately, Andreas knew how to access it and where the key to the safe was. The gun's serial numbers matched, and Andreas confirmed that he had stolen the gun from the house. At a press conference, Andreas's parents expressed their belief that he should face appropriate consequences for his actions. They mentioned that their son's mental health had declined while he was in prison. Despite widespread public anger, the family attempted to explain Andreas's behavior. His father stated that Andreas had been struggling with depression, particularly following his breakup with Nadine. His mother added that while her son might have had mental health challenges, it is unclear why he and his family never pursued mental health treatment. Andreas faces charges for murdering 5 people with a firearm and for breaking and entering. Andreas's lawyer intends to base their defense on his client's questionable mental state. Andreas claims that after hearing hurtful remarks from Nadine and her brother, who attempted to force him out of the house, he lost touch with reality and was unable to control his actions. He states that the only thought in his mind was his desire to kill the cheater. He described this experience as a state of emotional turmoil. The lawyer hoped this would reduce his client's culpability. However, the prosecution argued that Andreas was merely pretending and insisted that he was aware of his actions, he fit to stand trial. The lawyer disagreed with this assessment. In the end, the court ruled that there were no grounds for reducing Andreas's criminal responsibility. Andreas believed he deserved a fair punishment and did not want to evade responsibility for his crime. From the outset, he intended to confess. He willingly went to the police station and had no plans to take back his confession made the morning after the massacre. His lawyers stressed Andreas's mental state during the case. Assessments revealed that he suffered from a disorder that left him with 2 choices: either walk away and forget or return to kill. There was no middle ground. Once he understood that he could not regain his relationship with Nadine, he became obsessed with the notion that Nadine should not belong to anyone. As soon as the murder trial started, Andreas confessed to the crime. He believed that confessing would make the legal process easier and reduce trauma for the victims' families, as well as for himself. He shared details about his relationship with Nadine, discussing his jealousy and the reasons behind his actions. He described Nadine as an attractive girl who attracted many admirers, which fueled his jealousy. Andreas held traditional views about women and felt that a good woman should behave differently. He couldn't accept Nadine's decision to break up, insisting that she was his property and that she shouldn't date or spend time with other men, even as just friends. On the night of the incident, he was also affected by Kevin's betrayal. Nadine's parents were annoyed with Andreas, and he was afraid of losing her entire family, with whom he felt closer than to his own. He claimed that after the breakup, his family did not provide the support he desperately needed, leading him to lose 10 kilograms. Ultimately, In a moment of rage, Andreas lost control and killed them all. Andreas showed remorse and offered condolences to the families of his victims, but some believed he was merely trying to get a lighter sentence. Prosecution witnesses testified that Nadine continuously told Andreas that their relationship was over. Despite this, he kept asking for another chance, hoping to get back together, and he stalked her without truly grasping the situation. During the hearing, Andreas came across as insecure. He spoke softly, often mumbling to himself, and cried during emotional moments. At times, he seemed to misunderstand the gravity of what happened, viewing it as an accident. The prosecution contended that there was clear evidence of a brutal, premeditated murder involving 5 victims. They argued that Andreas had ample time to think through his actions as he drove to and from his ex-girlfriend's house. When he returned home, he took 3 items: a gun, a knife, and a baseball bat, indicating that he had meticulously planned his actions. The choice to take a knife suggested he intended to ensure there would be no survivors among Nadine's family and her friend Florian. During the hearing, the prosecution pointed out that Andreas had changed his marital status on social media from engaged to widower. Andreas claimed that this change occurred shortly after Nadine's murder, but some friends and acquaintances suggested that Andreas may have done so intentionally beforehand. Just a few months after their breakup, he started reacting more aggressively to Nadine's rejections. He often expressed a desire for her to be dead and sent messages accusing her of dating someone new, voicing a wish to kill that person. At the time, these statements were not taken seriously. The lawyer argued that these were simply emotional responses to rejection, which Andreas struggled to accept. However, this did not necessarily mean he intended to kill her. Nadine's friends mentioned that she had been feeling fearful of her ex lately and had been trying to avoid him as much as she could. She discovered that Andreas had been engaging in violent acts, such as beheading chickens with a machete and torturing cats. His actions appeared to be quite dangerous. During the trial, the defendant struggled to answer many questions, especially regarding why, in addition to Nadine, her friend Florian, brother Kevin, and her parents were killed. The lawyer argued that this showed Andreas lacked control over his actions and didn't fully grasp what was happening. However, the Austrian justice system made a definitive ruling: the murder of 5 people could not be seen as a mitigating factor. The idea that Andreas was insane was dismissed. By the end of the trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean he will be incarcerated for life. In Austria, individuals with life sentences are often released after an average of 21 years. Furthermore, the lawyer vowed to continue advocating for his client's release and planned to file appeals. On the morning of May 17, 2005, a 911 call came from a quiet home in Alexandria, Kentucky. A woman was screaming, claiming that someone had broken in and shot her husband. When the police arrived, they found the house in chaos. Drawers were pulled open, items were scattered everywhere, and broken glass covered the floor. In the bedroom, they discovered a man's body. Initially, it appeared to be a botched robbery, but something felt off about the situation. The children provided different accounts of the event, raising suspicion. Then, the police uncovered a crucial piece of evidence hidden deep inside the washing machine that changed the investigation. What truly happened in the Bosley home that morning? Robert Bob Bosley was born on August 6, 1962, in the small town of Alexandria, Kentucky. He grew up in a close-knit, religious family with his siblings. From an early age, Bob demonstrated a sharp intellect and a strong ambition. Although much of his early life is not well documented, it is clear that he started planning his future before he even became an adult. Bob dreamed of becoming wealthy and owning his own business. He began by offering chimney cleaning and minor roof repairs. With long hours, affordable rates, and a strong work ethic, he gained a reputation as a reliable and friendly worker. His hard work paid off. Eventually, Bob expanded his one-man operation into a successful business, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep in Alexandria. Under his management, the company became known for its quality and reliability, attracting loyal customers and generating impressive profits. With a growing influx of money, Bob aimed for even greater success. He started buying rental properties, eventually owned about 20. These investments significantly increased his income, making him one of the most successful businessmen in the area. His newfound wealth allowed him to enjoy a lavish lifestyle, complete with sports cars, horses, an airplane, a large boat, and a collection of expensive firearms. His boat, frequently spotted on Lake Cumberland, became known for hosting wild adult parties filled with alcohol, music, and scantily dressed attendees. Bob met 18-year-old Amy at one of his favorite local restaurants. Amy, also from Alexandria, grew up in a working-class family and faced financial challenges, especially due to her father's struggles with alcohol. Despite these difficulties, she was determined to create a better life for herself. After graduating high school with top honors in 1986, Amy enrolled in business studies at a community college affiliated with Northern Kentucky University. To support her education, she worked as a waitress, where she met Bob. He was older, wealthy, and charming. Initially shy, Amy soon became captivated by his lifestyle. She began attending his infamous lake parties and quickly became a close friend of his. Eventually, Amy won Bob's heart. After 4 years of dating, they got married. This was a major change for Amy, who had transformed from her modest beginnings to marrying one of the most eligible bachelors in the area. They then started a family, welcoming their daughter Morgan in 1996 and their son Trevor 3 years later. Amy transitioned from her carefree party days to fully embrace her new role as a dedicated mother, swapping late nights at the lake for school events and parenting responsibilities. Bob was expanding his business and investments, but he found one aspect particularly frustrating: administration. Managing payroll, taxes, invoices, and contractors felt burdensome to him. He preferred spending time by the lake rather than being stuck in an office. On weekends, he often disappeared on his boat for days at a time, keeping his location a secret. Friends later noted that Bob seemed to be distancing himself from his family, becoming more involved in a life of indulgence, secrecy. Since Amy had a background in business administration, he asked her to take over the company's financial and administrative tasks. Initially, she was hesitant, but she eventually agreed. From that point on, Amy took charge of managing the company's finances, payroll, and tax responsibilities. The Bosleys seemed to be doing exceptionally well, living in a charming log cabin in the woods south of Alexandria while their dream home was being built close by. This future home was impressive, featuring 14 acres, stained glass windows, a stone tower, and Gothic gargoyles. To everyone else, the Bosleys represented the American dream. They were good-looking, successful, generous with their time, actively involved in their church and their children's school. Bob was known for donating services to low-income families, earning respect throughout the community. However, beneath this fairy tale facade lay a troubling reality. As the administrator, Amy had access to the company's complete financial situation. While Bob focused on expanding the business, the lake, and building their dream home, Amy secretly started redirecting company funds. Instead of paying taxes, she funneled the money into a personal account that was hidden from view. For years, this embezzlement went unnoticed, but the IRS eventually caught on. They sent multiple letters, made phone calls, and tried to schedule meetings, but Bob never received any of these communications. Amy had ensured that all IRS correspondence was sent to a private mailbox she controlled, fully aware that the government was closing in but thinking she could delay things indefinitely. On the morning of Tuesday, May 17, 2005, just days before their 15th wedding anniversary, everything changed. Around 5 a.m., Amy Bosley made a frantic 911 call. Her panicked voice filled the line until the call was abruptly interrupted by a loud crash. The dispatchers attempted to reconnect. Shortly after, law enforcement rushed to the Bosley cabin. When they arrived, they found Amy in shock, holding her children. Her sister soon arrived to take care of the kids while Amy was taken in for questioning. Police secured the area and contacted the crime scene unit. As daylight broke, more officers arrived to search the nearby forest with K-9 units and a helicopter, looking for what they suspected was a fleeing intruder. In the bedroom, they found Bob's lifeless body. He was kneeling beside the bed, leaning forward, and had multiple gunshot wounds. However, only 2 shell casings were found in the room, which added to the confusion. As detectives examined the evidence, they started to doubt the authenticity of the crime scene and the entire narrative surrounding it. Except for the children's rooms, the rest of the house was chaotic. Kitchen cabinets were left wide open, including those under the sink, which seemed odd for a thief to rummage through. A rear door had a broken window, indicating a potential entry point, but surprisingly, most of the broken glass was outside rather than inside. This inconsistency raised suspicions from the beginning. The disorder continued elsewhere in the house. In the bathroom, the mirrored cabinet was open, and prescription bottles were strewn across the floor. It appeared more like a staged mess than the result of a rushed intruder. According to Amy's 911 call, the alleged attacker had left quickly, so why was there such a mess? As crime scene investigators examined the house, detectives began interviewing Amy Bosley at the police station. She seemed shaken and at times distressed, but appeared confused, as if she was having trouble remembering the details of her story. Amy described the intruder as a white male with a nasal voice, bad breath, and a strong odor of urine. She claimed he burst in during the night. He attacked both her and Bob. She had 2 marks on her chest, which she said were from the assault. When detectives asked who might have wanted to harm Bob, Amy indicated that he wasn't very popular, suggesting he had a wild reputation that could have led to enemies among disgruntled employees. She specifically mentioned a contractor and longtime friend of Bob as someone with whom Bob had recently had a disagreement. However, the friend was quickly ruled out as a suspect. He had a solid alibi and was very upset about Bob's death. Panic spread throughout the Alexandria community as schools were closed for several days due to the fear of a killer at large. Residents struggled to accept that Bob, a kind and generous man known for his willingness to help others, had been brutally murdered in his own home. Meanwhile, detectives at the cabin searched for clues. They found only 2 shell casings near Bob's body, despite multiple gunshot wounds, prompting them to look in the basement. There, in the family's washing machine, they discovered wet clothing and, at the bottom, a folded cloth with 4 additional shell casings. It was puzzling. Why would a fleeing killer hide evidence in a washing machine inside the victim's home? Even more unusual was an aluminum baseball bat found nearby, showing fresh scratches and white residue. Further lab analysis would be necessary to understand its potential relevance. Amy has been released and can now reunite with her children, but new details are emerging. The crime scene looks suspiciously arranged. Valuables, including large amounts of cash, were left alone. Amy's emotional reaction seems insincere. She showed no tears or genuine sorrow. Investigators believe there may be hidden motives. Then, a significant development occurred. IRS staff visited the station after learning about Bob's death. They had been trying to reach him for months regarding an enormous unpaid tax bill of over $1.7 million. A meeting was set for the day Bob died. The IRS agents also revealed an odd detail. During a previous call, they had spoken to someone who claimed to be Bob, but the voice sounded strange, high-pitched and unnatural. They suspected it was a woman pretending to be a man, and that voice may have belonged to Amy. The motive is now clear. Amy, who was responsible for managing the company's finances, had embezzled millions of dollars by redirecting tax payments into her personal account. Bob, completely unaware of her actions, he will learn the truth as soon as the IRS is ready to confront him. To make matters worse, there were allegations of Bob's infidelities. His sister later told investigators that she overheard Amy say she would shoot Bob if he ever cheated on her or left her. At the time, it seemed like a joke, but it now felt like a serious threat. Despite the growing evidence against her, Amy Bosley continues to deny any involvement in her husband's murder. During her second interrogation, she insists that she loved Bob, even though their marriage had its issues. She acknowledges that they faced problems, as many couples do, but argues there was no reason for her to harm the father of her children. Investigators, however, have a different perspective. Ballistics tests confirm that all 6 bullets that hit Bob correspond to 6 casings found, 2 in the bedroom and 4 concealed in the washing machine. A crucial development in the investigation occurred when Morgan and Trevor Bosley, ages 9 and 6, were interviewed separately. Both children provided the same description of the events. They had gone to bed peacefully but were suddenly awakened by the sound of 6 gunshots, followed by the sound of glass breaking. In contrast, Amy reported that the glass broke first and then the shots rang out, indicating inconsistencies in her story. Additionally, the scratches on her chest, which she claimed were from a struggle with the intruder, raised suspicions. The marks were too symmetrical, resembling staged wounds rather than genuine defensive injuries. A closer look at her blouse revealed that it hadn't been torn during the supposed attack. Instead, it had been carefully cut with scissors and then ripped to make it look damaged. Less than 2 weeks after Bob was murdered, authorities arrested Amy Bosley and charged her with the crime. However, there was one critical piece of evidence still missing: the murder weapon. Eventually, the weapon was found, but the circumstances of its discovery are unclear. One account states that a pistol from Bob's gun collection was discovered hidden in Amy's handbag, behind a wardrobe. Another version suggests that the weapon was found later by Amy's sister, who had taken care of Amy's children and belongings that night. While going through Amy's purse, she allegedly found the gun and promptly informed a lawyer, who then turned it over to the police. Regardless of how it was obtained, ballistic testing confirmed that the gun matched the 6 shell casings found at the crime scene and in the laundry. Although the bullets recovered from Bob's body were too damaged to establish a direct match, the circumstantial evidence against Amy was substantial. As the trial opened, prosecutors presented a straightforward and damaging story. For years, Amy had secretly embezzled money from Bob's company by diverting tax payments to herself. She had managed to evade the IRS through mail redirection and deceit, but her luck had finally run out. On May 17, 2005, Bob was set to meet with IRS agents who were insisting on explanations. Amy understood what this meeting signified: being exposed, facing divorce, and possible prison time. In response, the once respected wife, mother, and community volunteer came up with a desperate plan. The night before her meeting with the IRS, Amy, with her children asleep nearby, quietly took one of Bob's guns. Some sources claim she sedated the children first. While Bob was asleep, she shot him. Although wounded, he woke up and tried to defend himself. Investigators noted the way he was injured suggested he lunged at her, unaware that she was the one holding the gun. In shock and bleeding, Bob was unable to overpower her. She attacked him again. By the end of the incident, Bob Bosley, who had built his wealth from nothing, and who had put his trust in Amy, was dead in the home they were planning to share. Amy, who once supported him, now faced charges for orchestrating his murder, not out of fear, but out of greed. Bob Bosley's carefully built life of luxury and respect crumbled in one night due to cold calculations. What was left was a broken family, a shocked community, and an unforgettable legacy of betrayal. She smashed the back glass door with a baseball bat, rifled through cabinets and drawers to create the illusion of a burglary. Next, she concealed 4 spent bullet casings wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the washing machine. To make her injuries look real, Amy lightly cut her chest with what appeared to be scissors and slashed her blouse to suggest a struggle. Finally, she concluded her act with a 911 call, her voice filled with panic and the scene meticulously staged. Forensic evidence presented a different perspective on the case. Laboratory tests showed that glass fragments found on the aluminum bat matched the pieces from the broken rear door. The bat, which Amy's children recognized as belonging to their family, had not been used by an intruder. Instead, it was used by Amy herself. The police found no footprints, vehicle tracks, or any signs of anyone fitting the description Amy gave. No one had entered or left the house that night. Investigators also uncovered details about the Bosleys' marriage. Amy believed Bob had cheated on her. Photos discovered in their safe, taken during wild parties at Lake Cumberland, revealed a secret lifestyle and confirmed at least one affair. While the emotional pain of betrayal was evident, the real motive ran much deeper. Amy had embezzled the large amount of money from Bob's company by skimming off funds and failing to pay taxes. She thought that by killing him, she could keep her secret safe. Without Bob, his assets could cover the debt, allowing her to keep the remaining funds. The defense argued that the bullet casings could have come from Bob's pockets after a trip to the shooting range, but the evidence against Amy continued to mount. Despite this, her lawyer pointed out that there were no eyewitnesses, no DNA evidence, and no clear connection between the bullet casings and the bullets found in Bob's body. This ambiguity provided a chance to influence the jury's decision. Fearing that Amy might be acquitted and wanting to protect the Bosley children from the trauma of testifying against their mother, the prosecutors offered a plea deal. This would allow Amy to avoid a trial, spare her children the emotional strain, and receive a lighter sentence. In return, she would admit her guilt without revealing what had happened to the stolen millions. On November 2, 2006, Amy Bosley appeared in a Campbell County courtroom wearing a green and white prison jumpsuit. Her expression was impossible to read. Before the sentencing took place, Bob's family spoke directly to her. His brother accused her of being a liar and a fraud, warning her that although she might gain her freedom one day, she would never escape the memories of her actions. He reminded her that every night, she would see Bob's face and remember the tears of his children who were left without a father. Bob's sister fixed her gaze on Amy and asked the haunting question that troubled them all: did he beg you to stop? The answer would never be known. Next, Bob's mother approached, heartbroken and shaking, as she read a letter expressing her grief for the final goodbye that never happened. Amy remained silent, looking down and wiping away her tears. The judge acknowledged the damage Amy had caused, not just to her husband, but also to her children, her community, and her own future. He sentenced her to 20 years in prison. According to Kentucky law, she would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of her sentence, which equated to 17 years in prison. On May 18, 2022, exactly 17 years after Bob was murdered, Amy Bosley, who was 54 at the time, was released from the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Most news outlets barely covered her release, and her current whereabouts are unknown. Some speculate that she may be trying to find the millions of dollars she had embezzled. Bob is buried at St. Stephen's Cemetery in Campbell County, Kentucky. He is remembered for his kindness, ambition, and dedication to his family, tragically killed by someone he trusted deeply. In retrospect, Amy's choices appear both tragic and irrational. She was not in financial distress, and her husband was not abusive. The IRS may have offered a solution to her financial issues, or if she sought revenge, a divorce could have made her wealthier and free. Instead, she opted for murder. Emily Beatriz Azevedo Sena was born in Várzea Grande, a city in the Brazil state of Mato Grosso. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, who became a father figure to her when she was 6. He worked as a radiology technician at Santa Helena Hospital in the nearby city of Cuiabá. The family lived a modest yet close-knit life. Emily was known for her kind nature, calm demeanor. Classmates and neighbors often described her as a gentle person who avoided conflict. At 16, Emily found out she was pregnant, a surprising discovery that she ultimately accepted. The father was a young partner of similar age. Instead of pulling away, he supported her throughout the situation. They started living together and he actively participated in getting ready for the baby's arrival. He went with Emily to doctor visits, assisted with planning, took part in conversations about names and baby items. Despite their youth, her partner demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility, dedication. Although their relationship encountered challenges because of their age, it was characterized as stable, supportive. For Emily, becoming pregnant was a major milestone in her life. She eagerly talked about her future daughter and shared her excitement with family, friends. Her mother and stepfather were very supportive, helping her choose furniture, buy clothes, prepare the nursery. Their home was filled with joy and anticipation. They celebrated the gender reveal twice, once with her partner's relatives and again with Emily's family. Friends remembered how glowing she looked when discussing her journey to motherhood. In another part of Mato Grosso, Natalie Helen Martins Pereira, a 25-year-old married to Christian Albino Cibalho de Arruda, 28, was raising their 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. Natalie worked in public safety, officially employed by the fire department while also taking nursing classes. To others, she seemed organized, responsible. However, beneath this surface, her life was more complicated. Several years ago, Natalie had a medical procedure that tied her fallopian tubes, which prevented her from becoming pregnant naturally. Despite this, she began claiming that she was expecting another child. To support her claims, Natalie created fake medical documents, including ultrasound images, and told others that she was having a baby girl. Christian believed her and shared the news on social media, posted the ultrasound images, even organized a gender reveal party. To make her story seem more convincing, Natalie often posted pictures of herself with what looked like a growing belly or loose clothing and explained her physical appearance as a sign of her impending delivery. In reality, this was all part of a carefully orchestrated and emotionally manipulative lie, a fake pregnancy that relied on fabricated evidence. Natalie not only staged a fake situation but also created an online identity. She joined various online groups for expecting mothers, where she pretended to be a helpful member who often offered items like baby clothes, diapers, and accessories to other moms-to-be. However, there was a catch. The items could only be picked up in person at her house, and the person collecting them had to come alone. This was a deliberate strategy where her online persona was used to make contacts and choose potential targets. No one in Natalie's close circle, neither Christian nor her family, realized that her cheerful demeanor was a meticulously crafted facade. She was intent on making her story a reality, regardless of the consequences. A few weeks before her disappearance, Emily started participating more often in online groups for expecting mothers. She shared her pregnancy thoughts, sought advice, and welcomed support. In one of these forums, she was approached by a user. Her messages were friendly. She offered to donate items for Emily's future daughter, such as clothes, baby blankets, and diapers. This seemed generous, and Emily was genuinely interested. Their conversation soon turned more personal. The user came across as warm and caring, emphasizing her desire to help. When Emily suggested bringing someone with her, like her partner or sister, Natalie became uneasy. She mentioned that her street had many nosy neighbors, and she wanted to avoid attracting any attention. Although her responses were unclear, they didn't raise any major red flags. Emily talked it over with her family and initially decided against going by herself. However, she changed her mind after Natalie offered to send a driver to pick her up, saying the car would be from a ride-sharing service like Uber. On March 12, 2024, around noon, a car came to pick up Emily. However, the driver, as later discovered by investigators, was not affiliated with any ride-sharing service. It was believed that he was either a relative or a friend of Natalie. The car was an ordinary civilian vehicle. Unaware of any potential danger, Emily got in after telling her mother that she would be back soon. She thought the outing would be just a quick trip to collect some donated items before returning home. After more than an hour without any updates from Emily, her mother, Anna Paula Meridian, started to feel anxious. Soon, messages began to come from Emily's phone. However, instead of soothing her worries, the texts only increased her anxiety. Emily claimed she was fine, enjoying a pastry, and would be back soon. Yet, something felt wrong. The language used was strange, overly formal, and didn't match Emily's usual way of writing. Anna quickly realized that someone else must have sent the messages. She attempted to call Emily, but there was no response, and her voice messages went unheard. As her concern grew, the family reached out to friends and acquaintances in hopes of finding Emily. Emily's stepfather was working at the hospital that day. He sensed something was wrong. He knew Emily had intended to pick up some items, and her failure to answer calls made him even more anxious. That evening, the family quickly decided to file a missing person report. At that time, no one knew where Emily was, who the driver was, or where she was headed. The only clue the family had was an online conversation with the woman, who mentioned living in the Jardim Florianopolis neighborhood in Cuiabá. This clue marked the beginning of a search by family members and friends. Worried and desperate, they knocked on doors in the neighborhood, checked the streets, and attempted to call the number mentioned in the messages, but no one answered. Communication had completely stopped. Emily's phone was still on, but she wasn't answering. Then, Natalie suddenly changed her online behavior. She stopped replying to chat group messages and withdrew her support for others. Later, it was revealed that shortly after Emily left home, Natalie deleted all her messages and her account. This disappearance from the online world only confirmed the family's deepest fears. This was not a chance occurrence. By the evening of March 12th, the search for Emily was in full swing. Her family had reached out to the local police, shared her photos on social media, and appealed to the public for assistance. The initial hours after her disappearance were filled with urgency and anxiety, but no one anticipated how drastically the situation would develop. The following morning, March 13, 2024, a woman arrived at the emergency room of Santa Helena Hospital in Cuyaba with a newborn. She was in a wheelchair and told the hospital staff that she had given birth at home the day before. She described the labor as quick and straightforward, so she hadn't felt the need for medical help at that time. Now, she said, she was just there for a post-delivery checkup. The woman introduced herself as Natalie. That morning, the hospital staff member on duty was Emily's stepfather, a radiology technician. Although he did not know Natalie personally, he immediately sensed that something was wrong when he saw her. The previous evening, Emily had gone missing, and one of the primary theories suggested it was linked to a conversation she had with an online stranger who was offering baby items. Emily had previously mentioned to both her mother and her stepfather that she met someone online. She even shared a photo of her from the messaging app. Emily's stepfather immediately recognized the woman in the photo as the same person Emily had been talking to before she disappeared. Natalie was holding a newborn baby that the doctors believed had just been born. However, something seemed unusual. Her behavior and physical state did not align with what one would expect from someone who had recently given birth. There were no visible signs of pain, post-labor symptoms, bleeding, or trauma. Medical staff also found that she was not producing milk when she tried to breastfeed. Even the way she stood and moved raised concerns. Even though she arrived in a wheelchair, she moved around confidently and chose to sit in a chair rather than needing to. A preliminary medical evaluation raised concerns. There were no signs that she had recently given birth. Her cervix was not dilated, and her uterus was of normal size, showing no changes or discharges that usually occur after delivery. This became crucial evidence that proved her story was false. The medical staff quickly informed hospital administrators and contacted local authorities about the situation. Emily's stepfather told investigators that Emily had gone missing the day before after planning to meet a woman. When he recognized the woman in front of him matched Emily's description and photo, his concerns grew. When officers arrived at the hospital, Natalie claimed that the newborn girl was her daughter, whom she had given birth to at home. She could not provide any documentation to support her claim, saying the birth was unexpected and there was no time to go to a medical facility. She answered questions calmly and showed no signs of distress. Investigators started looking into the origin of the newborn. They ordered emergency blood tests and DNA analysis. Medical professionals confirmed that the baby had been born within the last 24 hours, which matched the timeline of Emily's disappearance. This led to a troubling question: could this child be Emily's daughter? Investigators examined Natalie's phone and found deleted conversations, including exchanges with Emily. These messages showed that Emily had agreed to meet Natalie to receive baby items. This evidence indicated a clear pattern of deception. Natalie had created a false identity, gained trust, and arranged a meeting under false pretenses. At this point, the idea that Natalie had simply gone to the hospital for a checkup was no longer believable. Law enforcement began to suspect that Natalie may have brought a baby that she did not give birth to, but rather one that was taken from someone else. Their suspicions were confirmed when they analyzed ultrasound images that Natalie had shared on social media. Investigators discovered that these images did not belong to her. They were taken from another woman's profile, a woman living in a different state, who had no known connection to Natalie. As these discrepancies emerged, the police shifted their focus to finding Emily. The infant Natalie had brought to the hospital was placed in temporary protective custody, under the care of social services, until her biological identity could be verified. Shortly after, Natalie was taken to the police station for formal questioning. At first, she remained silent. When directly asked about the child's origin, she gave vague answers, claiming that everything had been explained and that nothing wrong had occurred. Although she appeared calm and showed no signs of panic, her reluctance to provide a clear explanation led investigators to suspect that she was stalling. Only after investigators showed her the medical exam results, which disproved her claim of giving birth, along with the recovered text messages linking her to Emily, did Natalie change her story. She then shared her initial account of events. She claimed to have met Emily in online parenting groups and said that Emily was struggling in her relationship. Emily had thought about not keeping the baby. Natalie asserted that she offered to take care of the child and that Emily had agreed. However, law enforcement had doubts about this explanation. Emily's family strongly denied any claims that she intended to give up her daughter. They insisted that Emily had been excited about her baby's arrival and never showed any doubts about keeping her. The whole family actively prepared for the new baby by buying clothes, setting up a nursery, and celebrating together. Emily's mother and stepfather emphasized that she viewed her future daughter as the most important part of her life, and the thought of giving the baby away was entirely unthinkable for her. This information was part of the official case file, and Natalie's statements were now being examined for inconsistencies. When faced with increasing evidence, Natalie eventually changed her story. In a second interview with investigators, she confessed that she had tricked Emily into coming to a house by pretending to offer baby items. Emily arrived alone, as they had agreed in their online communication. Emily then began to feel pain and sat down, complaining of cramps. At that moment, Natalie approached her from behind and forcefully restrained her. After Emily lost consciousness, Natalie bound her wrists and ankles with materials she had available. She then tried to deliver the baby by making an incision in Emily's abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool. Emily received no medical assistance and ultimately died due to severe blood loss. Natalie did not express any regret in her statement. She claimed that she wanted to take care of the baby and did not mean to cause any harm. However, the way she acted, using restraints and preparing certain materials, suggested that her actions were thought out beforehand. As Natalie continued to speak, her versions of events became more inconsistent with the facts. Investigators ultimately determined that the incident was pre-planned. After questioning Natalie, law enforcement started investigating all places associated with her. One property in the Jardim Florianopolis area received special attention. This private residence, owned by Natalie's brother, was said to be where she met Emily. During the property inspection, police noticed an area behind the house where the ground looked recently disturbed. The soil was uneven. They quickly cordoned off the area and called in forensic specialists. As the specialists carefully removed the top layer of soil, they discovered that a body had been buried. Emily's body was found in a shallow grave, covered loosely with dirt and debris. The way the body was positioned indicated it had been disposed of hurriedly. Her wrists and ankles showed signs of restraints, including ropes and bits of plastic cable. Investigators later determined that the bindings were made from old internet wiring. The grave itself was poorly dug, without the use of tools, and was barely big enough to hold the body. Emily's body displayed clear signs of trauma on her body. Her face had visible injuries, including bruises, swelling, and scratches. Forensic experts noted damage to her cheekbones and nose. There were also marks on her neck that suggested she had been choked, as well as bruises on her wrists indicating she had been forcefully held down. The autopsy revealed that these injuries occurred while she was alive, implying the use of significant force. It was determined that her death resulted from severe blood loss due to a deep wound in her abdomen. The precise T-shaped incision in her lower abdomen indicated that it was not an accident. Forensic experts indicated that the shape and depth of the cut suggested the perpetrator had a basic understanding of internal anatomy and made an effort to avoid injuring the baby. This degree of knowledge is rare for someone without medical training, although it could be obtained by watching detailed instructional videos. This was further confirmed by analyzing Natalie's internet search history. A key finding was that the burial site had been prepped in advance. Initially, Natalie claimed she dug the grave after the incident, but she later changed her story, admitting it was prepared the day before the meeting. A forensic team carefully examined the scene. Using chemical tests, they discovered important traces of biological material both inside the house and throughout the property. Blood stains were present in multiple rooms. Although some parts of the floor had been cleaned, residues were still left in the tile grout and seams. These findings were meticulously recorded and included in the criminal case. Given the amount of evidence, authorities officially reclassified the case as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. Immediately after her arrest, Natalie stated that she acted alone and that her husband, relatives, anyone else were unaware of her plans. At that time, the house was occupied by her brother and his wife. Natalie stated that her brother and his wife were not home when the crime happened, but investigators could not confirm this. Their exact whereabouts during that time remained uncertain. A significant question was whether they could genuinely be unaware of a freshly dug pit on the property or that someone had come in to help clean the house. However, it was later established that Natalie had been to the house several times leading up to the incident, under the pretense of helping with chores or spending the weekend. This made her visits seem normal and unremarkable to those living there. Forensic experts noted that it would be very challenging for a single person to dig a pit, commit an act of violence, perform a makeshift procedure, move a body, clean the crime scene, hide evidence, and leave the area without drawing attention, all within a short period. This is especially true given the logistical difficulties involved. The body was wrapped in fabric and required various materials, while the cleaning process included removing items, white blood, and washing clothing. Each of these tasks demanded time, strength, and coordination. Did Natalie truly act alone? At the time of the investigation, there were increasing suspicions, but no solid evidence was found linking anyone else to the case. No family member had been officially identified as an accomplice. Cayo Police Chief Fernando Alvarez Albuquerque said authorities are continuing to investigate whether Natalie's husband, brother, and the driver had anything to do with the death and burial. After the body was officially identified and all forensic procedures were completed, Emily's family received permission for a burial. Because of the condition of the remains, the service was conducted quickly. The ceremony was brief and did not include a traditional farewell. It was held privately, attended only by immediate family members, Emily's mother, stepfather, the young father of the baby, and a few other relatives. The family was devastated by the loss. They were deeply affected emotionally and unable to speak publicly about their grief. Emily's mother, as reported by those close to her, was in a fragile emotional state and had withdrawn from social interactions, avoiding even her neighbors. Emily's partner, who never expected to become a father under such tragic circumstances. According to the family, he has remained dedicated. He frequently visits the baby. Despite his young age, he has shown a desire to be actively involved in raising his daughter. The newborn, who was rescued after the incident, has been placed temporarily in the care of her grandmother, Emily's mother, a decision made by child welfare authorities and the district attorney's office. Emily's stepfather is also considered one of the responsible guardians. During the first few weeks, medical professionals monitored the baby's condition closely. Fortunately, she stayed in stable health. After receiving medical clearance, the baby was taken home to the same place where her mother had lived. The reason for Natalie's actions remained a key topic of conversation. Even though she was already a mother of 3, she pretended to be pregnant for almost 9 months, creating an illusion of expecting another child. She went to great lengths to forge medical records and create a believable story online, portraying herself as an expectant parent on social media. However, her goal was not just to have another baby, she specifically sought out expecting mothers who were likely to have daughters. Her method of selecting targets, arranging the setting, and researching how to remove and take baby indicated that her actions were carefully planned. Natalie is still in custody, waiting for her trial. The charges against her are still active, and investigators believe the evidence supporting these charges is strong. Emily's case has gained significant attention and raised serious concerns, influencing how online interactions are perceived, particularly among vulnerable groups.
Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's Meat Market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired. Though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship, Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market and Takaria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property rather than fleeing or hiding his actions. He stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations.